So in the previous video, we briefly touched on molecules and atoms being bonded together. And so today we're going to look more specifically at how these reactions take place within a living system. So chemical reactions are the process that changes a chemical substance into a brand new one. It involves breaking and forming new chemical bonds. And in order for this to happen, you always have to have some energy present. Reactions start with a reactant. These are the substances that start a chemical reaction. And then they end with a product. These are the substances that form as a result of a chemical reaction. During a chemical reaction, the reactants are used up in the creation of these products. And an example of this would be burning methane. Methane is an organic molecule made up of one carbon atom and 4 hydrogen atoms. When we burn methane, our reactants are methane and oxygen, and bonds between the methane atoms, or the atoms in methane, break and produce carbon dioxide and water. The new bonds then will form in order to produce the carbon dioxide and the water molecules. So when we have chemical reactions, we can represent these happenings in a chemical equation. So this right here is the chemical equation showing the reaction of methane reacting with oxygen to create carbon dioxide and water. And so a couple pieces about when we look at these chemical reactions, you'll notice that there's an arrow almost in the middle. And the arrow's job is simply to separate the products and the reactants. And so the reactants are always on the left side of the arrow, and the products are always on the right side of the arrow. The arrow also indicates the direction in which the reaction proceeds. And so the arrow could be reversed, or you could have a double-headed arrow, and double-headed arrows are used for reactions that go both ways. Another thing to notice is that you'll have the coefficients. Let's do those in blue, the coefficients. And the coefficients are the numbers out in front. And the coefficients indicate how many molecules of the compound are present. So, for example, the 2O2, this 2 out front indicates that there are 2 oxygen molecules present, and as well as the 2 in front of the H2O, there are 2 water molecules present. So when chemical reactions take place, they have to follow the law of conservation of mass. And this says that in chemical reactions, the quantity of each element does not and cannot change. We have to maintain the same amount of each element in the products as there was in the reactants. So again, if we're looking at our methane example, we can see we have 1 carbon atom here and 1 carbon atom on the product side. On the reactant side, we have 4 hydrogen atoms, and on the product side, there are also 4 hydrogen atoms. And lastly, we look at our oxygen atoms on the reactant side, and we have 4. 2 times 2 is 4. And here we have 2 oxygen atoms, plus this 2 gets distributed to that oxygen, 2 there, so we have 2 plus 2 for a total of 4 oxygen atoms on the product side. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. It can, however, be rearranged. And that's what happens in a chemical reaction. There are chemical reactions, they get classified as either exothermic or endothermic. Exothermic are chemical reactions that release energy, and so their basic equation looks like our reactants and our products with energy. So example, methane burning produces energy, and you can feel that energy in the form of heat. Chlorine combining with sodium to form table salt also releases heat. And so a lot of times this energy that gets released can be in the form of heat or light or both. Endothermic reactions are reactions that actually absorb energy from their surroundings, and its general formula has the reactants plus heat in order to get the products. So an example here is your ice packs. In an ice pack, there's a tube inside of it, and when it gets broken, it releases a chemical that reacts with the water inside the pack. This reaction absorbs heat energy from the surroundings, and so it takes the heat away from the surroundings, and then it allows the pack to cool down because it no longer has that heat present. In order for chemical reactions to begin, there needs to be some amount of energy present, and we call this activation energy. This is the energy that is needed to start a chemical reaction. Reactant molecules are required to bump into each other in order for the reaction to take place. So we need the reactants to collide so they actually have physical contact so that they can break those bonds and rearrange themselves. This movement requires energy. And it doesn't matter if it's an exothermic or endothermic reaction, they both require energy to start. When a reactant molecules bump together, they may have a desire to repel one another, and overcoming these repulsion forces also requires energy. So if we look at the graph, we can see we start with our reactants here at some energy level, and we're going to keep adding energy to the system until we peak. This distance from the starting to the top is referred to the amount of activation energy. Once we peak is when the reaction starts to proceed and the amount of energy decreases. So the products in this case have less energy than the reactants. So some energy was given off in the course of this reaction. So how does this all relate to biochemical reactions or reactions inside our body? This is a field we call biochemistry that relies on knowledge of both biology and chemistry. And our total sum of all of our biochemical reactions we call our metabolism. And there are two types of biochemical reactions. We have catabolic and anabolic reactions. Catabolic reactions are exothermic, where anabolic are endothermic. Catabolic reactions break down large molecules into smaller ones. I kind of think of this as like a catastrophe. It breaks things down. In this breaking down, we release energy, hence the exothermic. So an example would be when we break down glucose, we release energy that cells need. Anabolic reactions are the exact opposite. They take small molecules and build bigger ones, and this requires energy. And this would be like joining the amino acids to form a protein. So like, remember we talked about sliding the colored noodles on the string to make a necklace? That takes energy. Most biochemical reactions are going to require some help. They can't just start on their own. And this is because the temperatures are usually too low within the body to allow the reactions to happen fast enough, and because organisms need the products from these reactions in order to survive. So we need these reactions to happen quickly in order to supply these products. And another reason that these biochemical reactions need help is that the concentration or the amount of reactants might be too low for them to actually bump into each other in order to react. So the solution here is enzymes. And so remember, we briefly touched on enzymes in the last video. And enzymes are proteins, so they're a type of organic molecule, and their job is to speed up biochemical reactions. And so they do this by reducing the amount of activation energy needed to start a reaction. So if you look here, this first graph is without enzymes, and you'll notice how much activation energy is required. Whereas when we have an enzyme present, it requires much less activation energy. So it doesn't take as much time to gather all this energy in order for the reaction to occur. So enzymes are involved in most biochemical reactions. This is because without enzymes, a lot of biochemical reactions could take several days to occur. With enzymes present, the same reaction can occur within seconds. So it significantly decreases the amount of time needed for these chemical reactions to take place. Enzyme activity will depend on the temperature, the ionic conditions, as well as the pH of the surroundings. Lastly, enzymes are very specific for the reaction in which they help. It's kind of like a lock and key mechanism. Enzyme A can only help with reaction A. Enzyme B can only help with reaction B. So it's important to notice that enzymes are not reactants, and they do not get used up during the reaction. They are reusable. So it's kind of, if you think about like a wrench helps get the job done. The wrench doesn't change while it's doing the job, and then the wrench can be used again and again and again. And so enzymes are very, very similar to that.